My son wanted $100,000 for his startup plan, and I turned him down. 2 days later, his wife brought me coffee and said, "I made this just for you." It smelled strange, so I switched cups with her mom. 1 hour later. What if the most dangerous enemy you ever faced wasn't a stranger or a business rival, but someone who looked you in the eye and called you mom? Imagine facing a betrayal so deep, so calculated, it felt like the very ground beneath you was crumbling, all for a fortune you never even wanted. This isn't just a story about money. It's about a decade-long con, a twisted family murder plot, and the kind of revenge that leaves you chilled to the bone. At 68, I, Eleanor Vance, thought I'd seen it all. Our family's oil empire, built on 500 sprawling acres of prime Texas land, had taught me the harsh truth: money doesn't just talk. It screams, it lies, and sometimes it kills. Our mansion itself, with its 14 rooms of hand-carved mahogany and crystal chandeliers, stood as a monument to 3 generations of Vance prosperity. But ever since my husband, Thomas, passed 5 years ago, it had felt less like a home and more like a beautifully gilded cage, utterly lonely. I was left to manage an empire I'd never truly desired. The air in my study was usually thick with the scent of old leather and wealth, but that Tuesday morning in October, something else hung heavy. I was deep into reviewing quarterly reports when I heard the familiar growl of Arthur's BMW approaching. My 35-year-old son rarely visited without an agenda, and as I watched him through the bay windows, I could see the tension in his shoulders, even from a distance. Arthur had always been handsome, with that easy, privileged charm that opened doors and, unfortunately, often closed his mind to the realities of hard work. But lately, that youthful confidence had been replaced by a desperate hunger that unsettled me. It was the look of a man who'd tasted failure and found it utterly bitter. "Mom," he burst into my study, his expensive suit wrinkled, his perfect hair disheveled. "We need to talk." I slowly lowered my reading glasses, studying the dark circles under his eyes, the barely perceptible tremor in his hands. "Of course, sweetheart. Sit. You look terrible." "Thanks for the pep talk," Arthur muttered, collapsing into the leather chair opposite my mahogany desk. "Look, I'm going to cut straight to the chase. I need money. A lot of money." Here we go again, I thought. Arthur's ventures were notorious for needing my financial intervention. His last startup, some restaurant rating app, had drained $300,000 before its spectacular implosion. Before that, a clothing line that never made it past the design phase. Each failure came with elaborate excuses about market timing, but the result was always the same: my bank account lighter, his promises grander. "How much?" I asked, though a nod of dread told me I didn't want to know. $100,000. The number hung in the opulent air, sharp and chilling. It was more than he'd ever asked for, and the casual way he said it, like ordering coffee, set off every alarm bell in my head. "That's a substantial amount, Arthur. What's this venture?" "It's a tech startup, revolutionary online marketing platform that's going to change everything." His words tumbled out, rehearsed, rushed. "My partner has connections with Fortune 500 companies. We're projecting 7-figure profits in the first year alone." I'd heard this song before. It never ended well. "Who's your partner?" Arthur's eyes flickered away. "You don't know him. He's from California. Tech background, proven track record." "What's his name?" "Mom, why does it matter? The opportunity is what's important here." The evasion was a blaring siren. 30 years as a prosecutor had taught me to recognize the birth of a lie. Arthur was hiding something, and it required $100,000 to fix. "Arthur, we've had this conversation before, multiple times. I've supported your dreams generously, and none have succeeded. Perhaps it's time you tried building something with your own resources." His transformation was immediate, terrifying. His face darkened, hands clenching into fists. For a moment, I saw his father in his eyes, my ex-husband, who'd tried to manipulate me out of my inheritance years ago. "My own resources?" Arthur's voice rose to a near shout. "What resources, Mom? I'm drowning here. Do you have any idea what it's like to live in the shadow of all this?" He gestured wildly at the rich surroundings. "Everyone expects me to be successful because I'm a Vance. But how can I compete when you control everything? I've given you every advantage. Advantages? He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. You've given me just enough to fail spectacularly. Just enough to make me look like a spoiled rich kid who can't make it on his own, but never enough to actually succeed. The accusation stung because it held a kernel of truth. I had been careful, perhaps too careful, but I'd seen too many wealthy families destroyed by children who never learned the value of work. Arthur, calm down. Let's discuss this rationally. There's nothing to discuss. I need that money, and I need it now. This isn't a request, Mom. It's a necessity. Give me the money, Mom. You'll soon die anyway. My blood ran cold. My son wanted me dead. This wasn't the petulant demand of a spoiled child. This was something else entirely, dangerously close to a threat. The answer is no, Arthur. I won't be investing in another one of your ventures. He stood abruptly, his chair rocking. Fine. But don't come crying to me when you're older and alone, because you chose money over family. The words hit like a physical blow, but it was the cold calculation in his eyes that truly terrified me. This wasn't anger. It was something far worse. Arthur, is there something you're not telling me? Are you in some kind of trouble? For just a moment, his mask slipped. I saw fear, desperation, genuine panic. But then the coldness returned, and he headed for the door. Forget I asked, he said without turning. I'll figure it out myself. As his BMW roared down the driveway, kicking up gravel, I sat alone, feeling like I'd just dodged a bullet I didn't understand. Something was very wrong with my son. And whatever it was, it required $100,000 to solve. I reached for my phone, then hesitated. Arthur was my son, my flesh and blood. Whatever trouble he was in, we could work through it together. That decision would nearly cost me my life. 2 days later, Arthur returned with his wife, Genevieve. And immediately, I knew this wasn't a social visit. Arthur's previous approach had been desperate. This felt calculated. They arrived at exactly 10 a.m., not early enough to seem overeager, not late enough to appear disrespectful. The timing felt deliberate. I watched from my kitchen window as they exited Arthur's car. Genevieve commanded attention. She was beautiful in that sharp, expensive way that required considerable maintenance. Platinum blonde hair, designer clothes on her model-thin frame, an aura of confidence that came from knowing she was the most attractive person in any room. Arthur and Genevieve had been married 3 years, but I'd never felt truly comfortable around my daughter-in-law. There was something theatrical about her, like she was always playing a role. She'd say exactly what people wanted to hear, but her eyes remained cold, calculating. Eleanor, I hope you don't mind us dropping by, Genevieve purred, gliding into my kitchen, carrying 2 steaming cups in delicate china mugs. She moved with practiced grace, every gesture a performance. I brought you something special. She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than most people earned in a month, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. Everything about her suggested meticulous preparation for this visit. I made this just for you, she continued, extending a cup with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. It's a special blend I picked up from that boutique coffee shop downtown. Ethiopian beans with Madagascar vanilla. I thought you might enjoy trying something new. The coffee smelled wrong. Not just bitter, but sharp, with an underlying chemical odor that reminded me of almonds mixed with something medicinal. 30 years prosecuting criminals gives you an instinct for danger. Every nerve in my body screamed something was off, but I kept my expression neutral. How thoughtful of you, dear, I said, accepting the cup while studying her face. She watched me with predatory intensity, like a cat observing a mouse. Arthur lingered by the doorway, refusing to meet my eyes. His usual nervous energy replaced by a strange stillness, as if holding his breath. When I glanced at him, he quickly looked away, focusing on his phone with obvious discomfort. Arthur tells me you two had a little disagreement the other day, Genevieve said, settling gracefully into a chair, her own cup in hand. About business opportunities and family support. The way she said family support made it sound like an obligation, not a choice. I noticed she hadn't taken a sip of her coffee yet, despite encouraging me. We had a discussion about financial boundaries, I said carefully. Arthur has wonderful entrepreneurial energy, but I think it's important for him to develop his own resources. Of course, Genevieve agreed, her smile unwavering. Independence is so important, though it can be challenging when family members have such different perspectives on success. As she turned slightly to glance at Arthur, I made a split-second decision that would save my life. Using the moment her attention was diverted, I quickly switched our cups. They were identical white china mugs. The exchange took less than 2 seconds. Arthur's told me so much about his latest venture, I said, testing to see how much she knew about her husband's mysterious partner. It sounds very promising. Something flickered in Genevieve's eyes, surprise, maybe, or annoyance. Yes, he's very excited about the potential. And his partner? Arthur mentioned someone from California with tech experience. Genevieve hummed noncommittally, raising her cup, now my original one, to her lips. Innovation is so important in today's market. We chatted about meaningless things while I pretended to sip my coffee and watched Genevieve take her first real drink. Her face twisted slightly, as if she tasted something unpleasant, and her eyes widened with what looked like confusion. But she said nothing about the flavor, which was interesting. This is delicious, I lied, setting my cup down after another fake sip. You'll have to tell me where you found this blend. The shop on Elm Street, Genevieve said absently, her mind clearly working, trying to process something that didn't make sense. Arthur was checking his watch with increasing frequency. A tension in the room felt like a storm building. Whatever they'd come here to accomplish wasn't going according to plan. 20 minutes later, Genevieve started coughing. It began as a small, polite clearing of her throat, but quickly escalated into deep, violent spasms that shook her entire body. Her face flushed red, then began to take on a grayish pallor that made her look genuinely ill. Something's wrong, she gasped, gripping the edge of the table as the coughing worsened. Her voice grew hoarse, strained. I can't breathe properly. Arthur rushed over, his concern appearing genuine, or at least well-acted. Genevieve, what's happening? Are you having an allergic reaction? Hospital, she wheezed, her breathing increasingly labored. Need to go to the hospital now. As we rushed to prepare for the emergency room, Genevieve leaning heavily on Arthur, making appropriately distressed noises, one thought kept repeating in my mind, that coffee was meant for me. Which meant my loving daughter-in-law had just poisoned herself with her own murder weapon. The irony was so perfect, it almost made me smile. The ride to Mercy General felt like a scene from a medical drama, complete with Genevieve's increasingly theatrical symptoms and Arthur's perfectly calibrated concern. I sat in the back, watching the performance, marveling at the precision of their act. Genevieve's breathing was labored and raspy, her skin flushed and blotchy. She clutched her throat as if fighting for every breath. If I hadn't known better, I would have been genuinely worried. But knowing the coffee's intended target, I studied her symptoms with clinical detachment. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Arthur asked for the third time in 10 minutes, his voice pitched perfectly between concern and panic. Just hold on. We're almost there. Burns, Genevieve managed to gasp between coughing fits. Throat burning. Cyanide poisoning, I realized. The almond smell, the respiratory distress, the burning sensation. Someone had done their homework. Cyanide was fast-acting, difficult to detect without specific tests, and would cause exactly these symptoms. If she'd given me the full dose intended for my body weight, I would likely be dead by now. The emergency room at Mercy General was controlled chaos. But Genevieve's condition was dramatic enough to get immediate attention. We need help. Arthur called out, supporting his wife, who was now making choking sounds that would have been alarming if they weren't so perfectly timed. My wife can't breathe. The medical team responded with impressive efficiency. Within minutes, Genevieve was on a gurney, hooked up to monitors, surrounded by nurses taking vitals and asking rapid-fire questions. When did the symptoms start? Dr. Lena Sharma asked, clipboard in hand. About 30 minutes ago, Arthur answered, playing the concerned husband to perfection. She was fine this morning, then suddenly started coughing and having trouble breathing. Any known allergies, medications, recent changes in diet or environment? Nothing, Arthur said. She's always been perfectly healthy. I watched this exchange with growing fascination. Arthur answered all questions smoothly, never hesitating. Either he was remarkably calm under pressure, or he'd prepared for exactly this scenario. Mrs. Morrison, Dr. Sharma addressed Genevieve directly. Can you tell me what you were doing just before the symptoms started? Coffee, Genevieve whispered, her voice barely audible. Having coffee with her. Her eyes found mine across the examination area, and the way she said her carried an unmistakable note of accusation. Even in her supposedly weakened state, Genevieve was already laying the groundwork for what was to come. Dr. Sharma followed Genevieve's gaze to me. Are you family? I'm her mother-in-law, I said. We were having morning coffee when she became ill. Did you both drink the same coffee? Similar, I said carefully. Genevieve prepared it. 2 cups from the same pot. Dr. Sharma made notes. I could see the wheels turning in her medical mind. Food poisoning was a possibility, but only one person getting sick suggested either an allergic reaction or something more sinister. We're going to run some blood tests, Dr. Sharma announced. In the meantime, let's get you on oxygen and see if we can make you more comfortable. As the medical team worked, Arthur turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mom, I'm going to run home and get some of her things. Pajamas, medications. You know how hospitals are. Of course, sweetheart, I said, patting his arm. Take your time. It was interesting how quickly Arthur was leaving, especially when his wife was potentially fighting for her life. Either he was remarkably trusting of the medical staff, or he had somewhere else he needed to be urgently. I settled into the uncomfortable plastic chair in the waiting area, surrounded by the familiar sounds of medical emergencies. The magazines were outdated, the coffee was terrible, and the fluorescent lighting made everyone look slightly dead. It was the perfect setting for contemplating attempted murder. 3 hours later, Arthur returned with an overnight bag, looking appropriately exhausted and worried. His timing was impeccable. He walked through the door just as Dr. Sharma emerged from the treatment area with news. We found traces of cyanide in her bloodstream, Dr. Sharma announced with clinical precision. This appears to be deliberate poisoning. I'm required by law to contact the authorities. Cyanide. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Arthur's face went pale. He grabbed my arm as if seeking support. Poisoning, he repeated, his voice cracking with what sounded like genuine shock. But how? Who would do something like that? Before Dr. Sharma could answer, Genevieve's voice rang out from behind the curtain, weak, but remarkably clear for someone who'd been at death's door. She did it. Genevieve said, her finger pointing directly at me when the curtain was pulled back. Eleanor poisoned my coffee. She tried to kill me. The accusation hit the room like a bomb. Dr. Sharma stared at me with a mixture of shock and suspicion, while Arthur looked as if he'd been slapped. That's impossible, Arthur said, but his voice lacked conviction. Mom would never. She made the coffee herself, Genevieve continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. She handed it to me personally. She watched me drink it. Well, that was gratitude for you. Here I'd inadvertently saved her life by switching cups, and she was repaying the favor by trying to frame me for attempted murder. The irony was delicious, even if the consequences were likely to be serious. Detective Ben Carter arrived within 30 minutes, which suggested attempted murder cases received priority attention in our quiet Texas town. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and the patient demeanor of someone who'd heard every lie in the book. Mrs. Vance, Detective Carter said, introducing himself with a firm handshake. I understand there's been an incident involving poisoning. I'd like to speak with you privately if that's all right. We moved to a small consultation room down the hall, sterile, windowless, designed for bad news and uncomfortable conversations. I want to be clear from the start, Detective Carter began, opening his notebook. You're not under arrest, and you're free to leave at any time, but I need to understand what happened here today. I told him exactly what occurred, the strange smell, my instinct to switch the cups, Genevieve drinking what was originally meant for me. I kept my explanation factual, straightforward, the way I'd taught witnesses to testify during my years as a prosecutor. Mrs. Vance, Detective Carter said when I finished. If you suspected the coffee was dangerous, why didn't you simply refuse to drink it or warn Mrs. Morrison? It was the logical question, one-eyed anticipated. I wasn't completely certain something was wrong, I said. It was more of an instinct than a concrete suspicion. I thought switching the cups would be a way to test my concerns without creating unnecessary drama if I was wrong. And when Mrs. Morrison became ill, I realized my instinct had been correct. Someone had tried to poison me, and Genevieve had accidentally become the victim instead. Detective Carter made careful notes, his expression revealing nothing about whether he believed me. Who else knew you were having coffee this morning? Only Arthur and Genevieve. It was a spur-of-the-moment visit. Had you been experiencing any threats lately? Anyone who might want to harm you? I thought about Arthur's desperate request for money and his angry departure 2 days earlier, but something held me back from mentioning it. Whatever my son was involved in, I wanted to understand it fully before involving the police. Nothing specific, I said. When you have significant wealth, you're always aware that some people might see you as a target. When Detective Carter interviewed Arthur, I could hear the conversation through the thin walls of the consultation room. My son's responses sent chills down my spine. My mother's been acting strange lately, Arthur said, his voice carrying clearly. I don't think she'd actually hurt anyone, but she's been more paranoid than usual. Suspicious of everyone. In what way? Just little things. Asking a lot of questions about Genevieve's background, making comments about gold diggers and people who marry for money. The doubt in Arthur's voice was unmistakable. I thought it was just normal mother-in-law stuff, but now. My own son was throwing me under the bus, creating reasonable doubt about my mental state, suggesting I might be capable of poisoning his wife. Has she ever expressed any direct animosity toward your wife? She's never said anything outright hostile, but there's been tension. Mom can be very controlling when it comes to family money. She doesn't like anyone she thinks might be after her fortune. Each word was a carefully placed knife in my back. Arthur was painting a picture of a paranoid, controlling old woman who might poison her daughter-in-law out of jealousy. It was brilliant character assassination, and it was coming from my own child. When Detective Carter returned, his entire demeanor had changed. The polite, professional courtesy had been replaced by barely concealed suspicion. Mrs. Vance, I need to ask you some direct questions. Have you been concerned about your daughter-in-law's intentions regarding your family's wealth? The question was clearly based on what Arthur had told him. I chose my words carefully. I think it's natural for any parent to be protective of their family's assets, but I've never had any specific reason to distrust Genevieve. Your son mentioned that you've been acting more suspicious lately. Is there any truth to that? I don't believe I've been acting any differently than usual. Arthur may be interpreting normal caution as suspicion. Detective Carter made more notes. I could see him building a case in his mind. Wealthy older woman, suspicious of young daughter-in-law, history of controlling behavior around money, opportunity, and means to commit poisoning. Mrs. Vance, I'm going to need to examine your home as part of this investigation. Do I have your permission to conduct a search? I knew I could refuse and demand a warrant, but that would only make me look more guilty. Of course. I have nothing to hide. We'll also need to examine any computers, phones, or other devices that might contain relevant information. Whatever you need, Detective. As we prepared to leave the hospital, I caught one last glimpse of Genevieve through a gap in her room's curtain. She was sitting up, no longer struggling for breath, engaged in quiet conversation with a nurse. When she saw me looking, she offered a small, satisfied smile that made my blood run cold. That smile told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The search of my home was thorough, professional, and utterly devastating. Detective Carter arrived with a full forensics team and a warrant that gave them permission to examine every inch of my property. I watched from my living room as strangers in latex gloves went through my most personal possessions, looking for evidence that I was a would-be murderer. We appreciate your cooperation, Mrs. Vance, Detective Carter said as his team spread throughout the house. This should only take a few hours. I sat in my study, the same room where Arthur had demanded money just 3 days earlier, and tried to process how quickly my life had spiraled out of control. 72 hours ago, I'd been a wealthy widow living quietly on her family's estate. Now, I was the prime suspect in an attempted murder case. The forensics team worked with methodical precision, photographing everything, dusting for fingerprints, collecting samples. They paid particular attention to the kitchen where Genevieve claimed to have prepared the poison coffee. "Ma'am," one of the technicians called from the kitchen. "Can you show us where the coffee supplies are kept?" I led them to the pantry where my housekeeper kept various coffee beans, filters, and accessories. Everything looked normal to me, but the technicians treated each item like potential evidence, carefully bagging and labeling anything that might have come into contact with poison. "What about cleaning supplies?" Detective Carter asked. "Anything that might contain chemical compounds?" I showed them to the utility room where we kept the usual household chemicals: bleach, ammonia, drain cleaners. Again, they photographed and sampled everything. 2 hours into the search, I heard a technician call out from the guest bathroom upstairs. "Detective Carter, you need to see this." The excitement in his voice made my stomach clench. I followed, dreading what they might have found. In the guest bathroom, a room I rarely used and hadn't entered in weeks, they discovered a small glass vial hidden behind the medicine cabinet. The vial contained traces of a clear liquid, and beside it was a handwritten list that included Genevieve's name along with what appeared to be dosage calculations. "Mrs. Vance," Detective Carter said, holding up an evidence bag containing the vial and list. "Can you explain these items?" I stared at the evidence, feeling the world tilt. The handwriting on the list looked remarkably similar to mine, though I had no memory of writing it. The vial was completely unfamiliar. "I've never seen either of those items before," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant. "This is your handwriting, isn't it?" Detective Carter pressed, showing me the list more closely. Looking at it carefully, I had to admit it did look like my handwriting, the letter formation, the particular way I crossed my T's and dotted my I's. Whoever had written this had either studied my writing extensively or... "Detective Carter," I said slowly, "I need to tell you something important. While we were at the hospital this morning, Arthur left for several hours to get Genevieve's belongings from their house. He would have had access to my home during that time. Are you suggesting your son planted this evidence?" The words sounded insane even as I said them, but I couldn't ignore the obvious timeline. "I'm saying that someone with access to my house and knowledge of my handwriting could have placed these items here while we were at the hospital." Detective Carter studied me carefully. "Mrs. Vance, that's a very serious accusation to make against your own son." "It's not an accusation. It's an observation about opportunity and access." But even as I said it, I could see the doubt in his eyes. The grieving mother, caught red-handed with evidence of attempted murder, trying to blame her innocent son. It was exactly the kind of desperate deflection that guilty people attempted when cornered. "We'll be taking these items for analysis," Detective Carter said, sealing the evidence bags along with samples of my handwriting for comparison. "Of course, Mrs. Vance, I have to ask, do you own any firearms?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes, I have a pistol in my bedroom safe." "Why?" "We'll need to examine that as well." I led them to my bedroom and opened the safe, revealing a .38 caliber revolver that Thomas had insisted I keep for protection. The gun was exactly where I'd left it, and I couldn't imagine how it related to a poisoning case. "Has this weapon been fired recently?" Detective Carter asked. "Not in over a year. I occasionally take it to the shooting range, but I haven't done that in months." They bagged the gun anyway, along with the box of ammunition. I was beginning to understand that in a criminal investigation, everything was potentially relevant until proven otherwise. As the search team finished their work, Detective Carter pulled me aside. "Mrs. Vance, based on what we found today, I need to inform you that you're now considered a person of interest in this case. I strongly recommend that you contact an attorney." "Am I under arrest?" "Not at this time, but I advise you not to leave town without notifying my office." After the police left, I walked through my home, seeing it with new eyes. Rooms that had been photographed, surfaces dusted, possessions examined for criminal intent. My sanctuary had been violated. I felt like a stranger in my own house. But more than that, I felt the weight of betrayal settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Someone had planned this carefully, planting evidence that would point directly to me while creating a perfect cover story. And the only person who'd had the opportunity, access, and knowledge to do it was my own son. That night, I sat in my study with a glass of wine, staring at the oil derricks outside. The mechanical pumps continued their steady rhythm, extracting wealth, just as they had for 3 generations. But for the first time since inheriting this empire, I wondered if it would all die with me. Arthur hadn't just tried to rob me. He'd tried to murder me and frame me for the attempted murder of his wife. The complexity and cruelty of the plan took my breath away. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated his mother. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 5 years. David Cross speaking. David, it's Eleanor. I need your help. Someone's trying to destroy me, and I think it might be my own son. David Cross had been my closest colleague during my 25 years as a prosecutor. More importantly, he was the only person who truly understood how my mind worked. If anyone could help me navigate this nightmare, it would be him. Eleanor, David said, his voice immediately shifting to the sharp focus I remembered. Tell me everything. Don't leave out a single detail. He listened without interruption as I explained the entire sequence. Arthur's desperate request, the poisoned coffee, the conveniently planted evidence, and Arthur's calculated betrayal during the police interviews. Jesus Christ, David said when I finished. If Arthur is behind this, we're dealing with attempted murder and conspiracy charges. This isn't just about money anymore. I know. The question is how to prove it. First things first, you need criminal defense representation immediately. I'm going to call Jonathan Hayes. He's the best defense attorney in the state, and he owes me a favor from the Anderson case. David, there's something else. I think Arthur might be in serious trouble with dangerous people. The way he demanded that money, the desperation in his voice, this feels like more than just another failed business venture. What kind of trouble? I don't know yet, but I want to find out. If Arthur is involved with criminals, it might explain why he's willing to commit murder for inheritance money. David was quiet for a moment. I could almost hear him thinking. I still have contacts in law enforcement. Let me make some discreet inquiries about Arthur's recent activities. But in the meantime, you need to assume you're under surveillance. Everything you do, everywhere you go, everyone you talk to, the police will be watching. I understand. And be very careful around Arthur and Genevieve. If they're willing to commit murder once, they won't hesitate to try again. Jonathan Hayes arrived that evening, carrying a briefcase and the kind of serious expression that defense attorneys wore when their clients were in deep trouble. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 50s, but David had assured me that his age was offset by his brilliance and his complete lack of ethics when it came to protecting his clients. Mrs. Vance, Jonathan said, settling into my study like he owned the place. David has briefed me on your situation. You're in significant legal jeopardy, but the case against you has some interesting weaknesses. Such as the timeline, for one. The poisoning appears to have been planned in advance, but you had no way of knowing that Arthur and Genevieve would visit you this morning. If you were planning to poison your daughter-in-law, you would need advanced notice of her presence. Unless the prosecution argues that I was planning to poison Arthur and Genevieve was an accidental victim, I said, a good prosecutor still in me. Yes, they could argue that. But there's another problem, motive. Why would you want to kill Arthur? He's your son and your only heir. His death would actually complicate your estate planning significantly. I thought about the life insurance policy I suspected might exist, but decided to keep that information to myself for now. What about Genevieve? They could argue you wanted to eliminate her to protect Arthur's inheritance. Possibly, but that's a weak motive for murder. Wealthy families deal with gold-digging spouses through prenups and trusts, not poison. Jonathan opened his briefcase and pulled out a legal pad. Tell me about the evidence they found in your house, the vial and the handwritten list. I described the items in detail, emphasizing how the handwriting looked like mine, but that I had no memory of creating the list. Jonathan made careful notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about the timeline and Arthur's access to my home. The planted evidence is actually our strongest defense, Jonathan said. It's almost too convenient. Real poisoners don't usually leave behind signed confessions with their victim's name and dosage calculations. What's our next step? We need to investigate Arthur and Genevieve independently. If they're running a con, there will be evidence, financial records, communication patterns, possibly even previous victims. Previous victims? Jonathan leaned back in his chair, studying me. If your son is willing to murder his own mother for inheritance money, this probably isn't his first rodeo. People don't usually jump straight to matricide without working their way up through smaller crimes. The thought sent ice through my veins. You think they've done this before? I think we need to find out. David is already running background checks on both of them. If there are any red flags in their past, we'll find them. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the house made me jump. Every shadow seemed threatening. I'd installed a state-of-the-art security system years ago, but knowing that my son had keys and access codes made it feel useless. Around 3 a.m., I heard a car in my driveway. From my bedroom window, I saw Arthur's BMW. He sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, making phone calls, appearing agitated. Finally, he got out and approached the house. Instead of using his key, he knocked softly. When I didn't answer, he tried the handle and found it locked. He walked around the perimeter, testing windows, checking for other entry points. This wasn't the behavior of a concerned son checking on his mother. This was reconnaissance. After 20 minutes, Arthur gave up and drove away. I immediately called Jonathan. He was casing the house, I told him, looking for ways to get inside without using his key. Did you record any of this? The security cameras should have captured everything. Perfect. Don't touch those recordings. We'll need them if this goes to trial. The next morning brought more bad news. Detective Carter called to inform me that the preliminary forensics results had confirmed my fingerprints on the poison vial and that the handwriting analysis was consistent with my writing samples. Mrs. Vance, Detective Carter said, I need you to come to the station for additional questioning. You have the right to have your attorney present. I'll be there, Detective. I'm bringing my lawyer. Call Jonathan, I said into the phone. They're moving faster than I expected. This feels like they're building toward an arrest, Jonathan said. We need to accelerate our own investigation. That afternoon, as Jonathan and I sat in the police station waiting room, I felt the walls closing in. The evidence against me was circumstantial but compelling. I had motive. Protecting family wealth means access to poison and opportunity, preparing the coffee. The planted evidence provided the smoking gun that would convince a jury of my guilt. Mrs. Vance, Detective Carter said when we were finally called into the interview room. We've received additional forensic results that I think you should be aware of. Jonathan leaned forward slightly. What kind of results? The poison found in Mrs. Morrison's bloodstream is an exact match for the substance in the vial recovered from Mrs. Vance's home. We also found traces of the same substance on a coffee mug in Mrs. Vance's kitchen. My heart sank. They'd found physical evidence linking me directly to the crime. Even if I could prove the evidence was planted, it would be difficult to convince a jury that someone had gone to such elaborate lengths to frame me. Detective Carter, Jonathan said smoothly. My client maintains her innocence. This evidence is clearly the result of contamination or tampering. By whom? By the real perpetrator who had access to Mrs. Vance's home while she was at the hospital. Detective Carter looked skeptical. You're suggesting that someone else poisoned Mrs. Morrison, then broke into Mrs. Vance's house to plant evidence? I'm suggesting that the timeline and circumstances don't support the conclusion that my client is guilty of this crime. But I could see in Detective Carter's eyes that he'd already made up his mind. To him, I was a wealthy old woman who tried to murder her daughter-in-law and was now desperately trying to blame her innocent son. Mrs. Vance, Detective Carter said, based on the evidence we've gathered, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted murder. As the handcuffs clicked around my wrists, I looked at Jonathan and saw my own fears reflected in his eyes. Arthur and Genevieve had played this perfectly, and I was about to pay the price for underestimating my own family. But as they led me toward the patrol car, one thought kept me from despair. They'd made one crucial mistake. They'd left me alive. And as long as I was breathing, I wasn't finished fighting. The county jail was everything I'd expected and worse. Gray concrete walls, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look dead, and the constant sound of metal doors slamming shut. I'd sent enough criminals to places like this during my career, but experiencing it firsthand was profoundly different. My cellmate was a woman named Sophia, arrested for check fraud, and surprisingly philosophical about the experience. First time, she asked as I tried to make myself comfortable on the narrow bunk. Unfortunately, yes. What did you do? They think I tried to poison my daughter-in-law. Sophia whistled low. Family drama. That's always the messiest kind of crime. I didn't do it. Honey, everybody in here didn't do it. But the real question is, can you prove you didn't do it? That was exactly the question keeping me awake. Jonathan had warned me that proving innocence was much harder than establishing reasonable doubt, especially when the evidence was as seemingly solid as what they'd assembled against me. The bail hearing was set for Monday morning, 3 days away. Jonathan was confident he could get me released, but the prosecution argued that I was a flight risk due to my substantial wealth and that I posed a danger to potential witnesses. The district attorney is treating this like a high-profile case, Jonathan explained during one of his visits. They think convicting a wealthy oil heiress will be good publicity. What about our investigation into Arthur and Genevieve? David is making progress, but it's slow going. We've confirmed that Arthur has significant gambling debts, over $300,000 to some very unsavory people. That gives him clear motive for needing money quickly. $300,000? The number staggered me. How did he accumulate that kind of debt? High-stakes poker games, sports betting, some kind of cryptocurrency speculation that went wrong. The point is, he was desperate enough to do something drastic. What about Genevieve? Jonathan's expression darkened. That's where it gets interesting. Genevieve Morrison doesn't exist. My pulse quickened. Huh? What do you mean? The identity is fake. Created about 4 years ago with forged documents and a fabricated background. David traced her real identity to a woman named Rebecca Martinez, who has a criminal record in 3 states. What kind of record? Identity theft, fraud, and get this, suspected involvement in a suspicious death of an elderly man in Arizona. The case was never prosecuted due to lack of evidence, but the pattern is clear. Suddenly, everything made sense. Arthur hadn't just married a beautiful woman. He'd married a professional criminal who specialized in exactly the kind of scheme they'd tried to pull on me. So, this was planned from the beginning. It looks that way. Rebecca probably targeted Arthur because of his family wealth, then manipulated him into helping her gain access to you. But why try to kill me? Why not just wait for me to die naturally and inherit everything? Jonathan pulled out a folder from his briefcase. Because Arthur isn't your heir anymore. I stared at him in confusion. What are you talking about? David did some digging into your estate planning. 3 months ago, you updated your will to establish a charitable foundation instead of leaving everything to Arthur. If you died today, Arthur would inherit nothing. The memory flooded back. I'd been concerned about Arthur's spending habits and his series of failed business ventures. My estate attorney had suggested creating a foundation that would provide Arthur with a comfortable income while ensuring the bulk of the principal fortune would be used for charitable purposes. Arthur knows about the will change, Jonathan continued. Your attorney's office confirmed that Arthur called asking about your estate plans about 6 weeks ago. So, he knew that killing me wouldn't get him the inheritance, right? But if you were convicted of attempting to murder Genevieve, the will could be challenged on grounds of mental incompetence or criminal behavior. Arthur could argue that I wasn't of sound mind when I changed the will. The complexity of their plan was staggering. They hadn't just tried to kill me. They tried to destroy my reputation and mental competency so that Arthur could inherit my fortune even after I'd specifically disinherited him. There's more, Jonathan said. We found evidence that Arthur has been taking out loans against his expected inheritance. He owes money to several legitimate lenders and some very illegitimate ones. If he doesn't inherit your estate, he's not just broke, he's in physical danger from the people he owes money to. Exactly. These aren't the kind of creditors who accept payment plans. I spent that night staring at the ceiling of my cell, processing the full scope of Arthur and Rebecca's betrayal. My son wasn't just capable of anything, he was desperate. But knowledge was power, and now I had the ammunition I needed to fight back. Sophia, I said to my cellmate around 2 a.m., what do you know about getting revenge on people who try to destroy your life? She rolled over and looked at me with new interest. Honey, that depends on how far you're willing to go and how much money you've got to spend. I have more money than I know what to do with, and after what they've put me through, I'm willing to go pretty far. Sophia smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. In that case, you and I need to have a very interesting conversation. The bail hearing was a media circus. News vans lined the street, and reporters shouted questions as Jonathan escorted me through the crowd. Oil heiress accused of poisoning daughter-in-law was the headline on every local news station, and I could see the story spreading to national outlets. Arthur and Genevieve were in the courtroom, sitting in the front row with their attorney. Genevieve looked appropriately frail and victimized, while Arthur played the role of the devastated son, torn between loyalty to his mother and justice for his wife. Judge Helen Albright presided over the hearing with the no-nonsense efficiency I remembered from my prosecutorial days. She listened to arguments from both sides, reviewed the evidence, and set bail at $2 million, high enough to make a statement, but not so high as to be punitive. The defendant will surrender her passport and submit to electronic monitoring, Judge Albright announced. She is not to have any contact with the alleged victim or any witnesses in this case. As I was processed for release, Jonathan pulled me aside with urgent news. David found something big, he said quietly. Rebecca Martinez's real name is Maria Costa, and she's wanted by the FBI for a string of similar crimes across multiple states. The FBI? She's been running the scam for over a decade. Elderly victims in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, California. Always the same pattern. Marry into money, kill the spouse, inherit the estate. How many victims? At least 7 that we can confirm. Maybe more. The scope of Rebecca's criminal enterprise was staggering. She wasn't just a con artist. She was a serial killer who'd turned murder into a business model. Where is she now? That's the problem. After your arrest, both Arthur and Rebecca disappeared. Their house is empty, bank accounts closed, and nobody knows where they went. My blood ran cold. They're running. It looks that way. But here's the thing, we've been in contact with the FBI, and they're very interested in finally catching Rebecca Martinez. They're willing to work with us. What does that mean for my case? If we can prove that Rebecca Martinez poisoned herself as part of an elaborate frame job, your charges will be dropped immediately. But we need to find her first. That evening, I sat in my study with an electronic monitoring bracelet around my ankle, feeling like a prisoner in my own home. The media attention had been overwhelming, reporters camping outside my gates, helicopters circling, a constant stream of calls from journalists. I refused all interviews, but I watched the coverage with growing anger. Arthur was giving carefully orchestrated statements to sympathetic reporters, painting himself as the tragic son of a mentally unstable mother who'd finally snapped under the pressure of aging and wealth. My mother has been increasingly paranoid over the past year, Arthur told Channel 5 News. She's made accusations against multiple family members and friends, claiming they're after her money. I think the stress of managing such a large estate has affected her judgment. It was a masterful performance, designed to support the prosecution's theory that I was suffering from age-related mental decline that had led to irrational and violent behavior. But Arthur had made one crucial mistake. In his eagerness to appear on television, he revealed that he and Rebecca were still in the area. The interview had been conducted at a local hotel, which meant they hadn't fled as far as we'd thought. I called Jonathan immediately. Did you see Arthur's interview? I saw it. David is already working with the FBI to trace their location. Jonathan, I want to end this. All of it. I'm tired of being reactive. It's time to go on the offensive. What did you have in mind? I've been thinking about this since my conversation with Sophia in jail. I want to set a trap. Use myself as bait to draw them out into the open. Eleanor, that's incredibly dangerous. If Rebecca Martinez is willing to commit murder, she won't hesitate to try again. That's exactly what I'm counting on. The plan I outlined to Jonathan was elegant in its simplicity. We would leak information suggesting that I'd hidden evidence that could clear my name, documents, recordings, that proved Arthur and Rebecca had framed me. The bait would be irresistible to them, because as long as that evidence existed, they would never be safe. They'll have to come after me, I explained. Either to steal the evidence or to kill me before I can use it. And when they do, the FBI will be waiting. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. This is either brilliant or suicidal. I'm not sure which. After what they've put me through, I'm not sure I care. The leak was carefully orchestrated through David's media contacts. By the next morning, rumors were circulating that Eleanor Vance had discovered evidence proving her innocence and was planning to present it to authorities within 48 hours. The story was vague enough to be believable, but specific enough to create urgency. If Arthur and Rebecca thought I had evidence that could expose them, they would have to act quickly. All I had to do was wait for them to come to me. The waiting was the hardest part. For 2 days, I went through the motions of normal life, wearing a wire and knowing that FBI agents were positioned around my property. Every phone call could be the setup for an ambush. Every visitor could be a potential assassin. Jonathan had wanted to evacuate me to a safe house, but I'd insisted on staying at the estate. If Arthur and Rebecca were going to make a move, it would be on familiar ground where they felt confident, and I appeared vulnerable. On the 3rd night, they took the bait. I was in my study, pretending to review documents while actually reading a novel, when the motion sensors detected movement near the back of the house. The FBI had installed additional security equipment that would alert them to any intrusion, but I was on my own until they could respond. Arthur appeared first, slipping through the French doors that led from the garden to my living room. He moved with practiced stealth, clearly familiar with the house's layout and security blind spots. Rebecca followed a moment later, carrying what looked like a small medical bag. I remained in my study, but I could hear their whispered conversation through the thin walls. Where would she hide it? Rebecca asked, her voice carrying a slight accent that hadn't been present when she was playing the sweet daughter-in-law. Probably in the safe, Arthur replied. She keeps all her important documents there. What's the combination? My birthday. She's sentimental like that. They moved through my house like they owned it, searching methodically for evidence that didn't exist. I heard drawers being opened, papers shuffled, and the occasional curse when they came up empty-handed. Arthur, Rebecca said after 20 minutes of fruitless searching. Are you sure she has something? This could be a trap. She has to have something. How else would she know to switch the coffee cups? Maybe she got lucky. No, my mother's too smart for luck. She figured something out, and now she's planning to use it against us. The grudging respect in Arthur's voice might have been flattering under different circumstances. Even after trying to murder me, he still recognized that he'd underestimated his opponent. We need to find her, Rebecca said. Make her tell us where it is, and then we finish what we started. They found me exactly where I wanted them to, sitting in my study with my back to the door, apparently absorbed in reading documents. Arthur entered first, moving with the confidence of someone who thought he had the upper hand. Hello, Mother. I turned slowly, letting surprise and fear show on my face. Arthur, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to contact me. We need to talk, Arthur said, while Rebecca positioned herself near the door to block any escape attempt. About the evidence you think you have. I don't know what you mean. Rebecca stepped forward, and I saw that she was holding a syringe. Mrs. Vance, we know you have something that could hurt us. Tell us where it is, and this will be quick and painless. The mask was completely off now. Rebecca's sweet southern accent had been replaced by something harder, more dangerous. This was Rebecca Martinez, the professional killer, and she was done pretending. There is no evidence, I said, allowing my voice to shake with what appeared to be terror. I made it up. I thought if people believed I had proof of my innocence, they might look more carefully at what really happened. Arthur and Rebecca exchanged glances. You're lying, Arthur said. She's not, Rebecca replied, studying my face with professional assessment. She's telling the truth. There is no evidence. Then why are we here? Rebecca smiled. And it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen. Because now we know for certain that she doesn't have anything on us, which means we can finish this properly. She raised the syringe, and I saw my death reflected in her cold eyes. Wait, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Before you kill me, I need to know something. Was any of it real? Did Arthur ever actually love me, or was this always about the money? Arthur's face twisted with something that might have been genuine emotion. Mom. Rebecca cut him off. He loves your money, just like I do. Just like everyone who's ever pretended to care about you. It was the cruelest thing she could have said, and it was exactly what I needed her to say. Thank you, I said quietly, for telling me the truth. Rebecca frowned, confused by my response. That confusion lasted exactly long enough for the FBI agents to crash through every entrance to my study simultaneously. FBI. Hands where we can see them. The arrest was swift and efficient. Arthur went down without a fight, but Rebecca tried to use the syringe as a weapon before being tackled by Agent Olivia Kim. The entire encounter was over in less than 30 seconds. As they read Arthur and Rebecca their rights, I sat in my chair, watching my son's life implode in real time. He looked at me with something between hatred and disbelief. You set us up, he said. You tried to murder me, I replied. I just returned the favor. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom, watching Rebecca Martinez receive 4 consecutive life sentences for the murders she'd committed across multiple states. The evidence against her was overwhelming. DNA, fingerprints, financial records, and most damning of all, the recorded confession she'd made in my study. Arthur received 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. As they led him away in shackles, he turned to look at me one last time. I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The media had turned me from suspected murderer into heroic victim overnight. Oil heiress helps FBI catch serial killer was much better publicity than my original headlines, and offers for book deals, movie rights, and interviews were pouring in. I declined them all. Some stories were too personal to share with the world. Jonathan had done an excellent job managing the legal aftermath. All charges against me were dropped, my reputation restored, and I was free to return to my quiet life on the estate. But quiet wasn't what I wanted anymore. Using my considerable resources and David's law enforcement connections, I'd spent the past 6 months systematically destroying every aspect of Arthur and Rebecca's criminal network. Their co-conspirators were arrested, their hidden assets seized, their reputations obliterated so thoroughly that even their fellow inmates knew exactly what kind of monsters they were. Arthur's gambling debts were still outstanding, and the people he owed money to weren't the forgiving type. Prison might actually be the safest place for him, though I'd made sure that information about his crimes and his family's wealth had reached the right ears. 25 years was going to feel much longer when you were constantly looking over your shoulder. For Rebecca, I'd arranged something special. The families of her previous victims had been very interested to learn about her location and daily routines. Prison justice operated by its own rules, and serial killers who targeted elderly people weren't popular with the general population. But my greatest satisfaction came from my updated will. The principle of my fortune would be used to help creatures who deserve love and care, rather than the human predators who tried to destroy me. Arthur would inherit nothing, except the knowledge that his greed had cost him everything. This morning, I received a letter from Arthur. It was full of apologies, explanations, and desperate pleas for forgiveness. He claimed that Rebecca had manipulated him, that he never intended for things to go so far, that he still loved me despite everything that had happened. I read the letter twice, then fed it into my fireplace. Some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness. Some wounds never heal. Arthur had chosen Rebecca and her blood money over the mother who'd given him everything, and now he could live with the consequences of that choice. As I sit here in my study, looking out at the oil derricks that have provided wealth and security for 3 generations of Vances, I feel something I haven't experienced in months: peace. The estate feels like home again, no longer tainted by the presence of people who saw me as nothing more than a source of money. The rooms echo with memories of better times, when family meant something more than financial opportunity. I've hired a new housekeeper, updated my security systems, and changed all the locks. Arthur's keys no longer work here, and he'll never set foot in this house again. My newel brings me daily satisfaction, knowing that every penny of my fortune will go to causes that matter, rather than the greedy hands that tried to steal it through murder. The Vance name will survive, but it will be associated with generosity and compassion, rather than the kind of family dysfunction that Arthur and Rebecca represented. Tonight, I'll pour myself a glass of wine and toast to justice served. Not the kind that comes from courtrooms and judges, but the kind that comes from refusing to be anyone's victim. Arthur and Rebecca thought they were dealing with a lonely old woman who could be easily manipulated and disposed of. They learned too late that Eleanor Vance hadn't survived this long by being weak. Some people collect art or jewelry. I collect the satisfaction of watching my enemies destroy themselves through their own greed and stupidity. And in that collection, Arthur and Rebecca's downfall will always hold a place of honor. This whole experience, it makes you question everything, doesn't it? What would you have done if your own family turned on you like this? I'm genuinely curious. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be reading every single one.